everyone. This is a Leadership with Heart podcast, and this is Heather Young, your host. Employee experience is powered by emotions. Managers and or leaders within organizations get to choose which emotions they unleash from within the people they lead. Leaders, meaning supervisors or above in an organization, drive much of the positive or negative emotions by their actions or inactions, their words, or what they fail to say. When a manager chooses their words and their actions carefully, they exhibit great emotional intelligence. These managers are often thought of as leaders who care, or as I like to call them, leaders with heart. This special brand of leader drives engagement and loyalty simply by being themselves. Are these leaders perfect? Absolutely not. It is in their awareness and sharing of some of their imperfections that we realize their brilliance. In this podcast, I ask you to see yourself in the stories my guests tell about times when they were not the best versions of themselves, but how they used their hearts to guide them to a place of deeper connection with their teams and heightened leadership prowess. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. This is Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast, and I'm super excited today to have Marylene Delbourg-Delphis on the phone. She actually was referred to me by one of my favorite people ever, Neil Hughes. And when he described her, he said, when I was interviewing her, I listened and everything she said, it made me think of you, Heather. And she really is all about the employee and about culture and organizational health. And I thought, I have got to have her on the show. I want to hear kind of her journey because it sounded super interesting with some Silicon Valley interactions and exposure. And then, of course, the fact that she's got this new book that's squarely in where my interest space is. So thank you for joining, Marylene.
Thank you so much for having me, Heather.
So where are you right now in your leadership journey?
Whew, that's a big question, right?
It is.
So my leadership journey is that I have been a CEO multiple times over the last 30 years. I've been a board member, and I'm a board member. I've helped, about 30 organizations.
Wow.
So basically, I'm not sure I'm in a leadership journey per se, but I always make sure that the people I coach become real leaders, and I always make sure that I would be consistently a leader myself. Does it make sense?
It does make sense, yes. That idea of self-leadership and trying to make sure that we are aligned with our own personal values and things like that, right?
Yes, that's exactly the case. And so I wrote this book, Everybody Wants to Love Their Job, to make sure that leaders will always remember that from a point of view of a company, work is a means to an end. But from the point of view of employees, work is their livelihood. And our leadership consists in being really consistently aware.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing thing to keep focusing on inside the book. I wrote a book, The 7 Intuitive Laws of Employee Loyalty, and a lot of that is that very similar message, which is why I think Neil referred you my way, because I think there's kind of a kindred spirit. And
yes.
The more we can continue to have this conversation and have leaders listening in, hopefully we can help to change just one person's mind as it relates to their people, right? So
Yes.
I think it makes a lot of sense to continue to have it. I don't think this ever gets old. I don't think this conversation can ever get old because it's always needed.
It's always needed because people don't change.
Yes. Well, very few do. And when they do, it's very slowly. And that's okay. That's what change is about. It's not about rapid necessarily.
Yes,
but that's
true.
what it is, right? Is that the people are changing. Some are very slowly. And we have to just continue to remind them so that they can get better, for sure.
Yes.
Okay.
But
So
by the way, before I speak more, I would like to recommend your book. This is a very good book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I haven't had a chance to get to yours yet. To get to yours, so I can, obviously refer yours out as well. Because I think that again, it's gonna knowing what Neil, all of the podcasts that he's listened to of mine, and then of course hearing what you had to say in his. I think he's very open and aware of what I'm all about, and just really the way I like to evangelize this topic. So I'm super excited to be reading yours as well. So when we think, traditionally when I talk about leaders with heart, I'm thinking about those who have, more emotional intelligence, those who are putting others first. Obviously they take care of themselves, so they exercise good self-care, and that's the good sign of a leader as well. But really, before they take action, they're thinking about their people. So what do you think, how would you describe your leadership style? Because you have led organizations and have been CEOs of many companies. Well, how would you describe your leadership style?
The reality is that I never thought much about my leadership style as a CEO board member, but I would call it an attuned leadership. And it includes two main components. One, a conversational leadership component, and second, a conscious attunement process that enables employees to feel that they belong in the company I run. Does it make sense?
Yes, I like. So the attunement is more like the using your intuition, or being alert.
Yes, but it's more than that. Okay, maybe I could explain the two aspects. Okay,
Okay.
so the conversational leadership is very close to what Boris Groysberg defined in an article for the Harvard Business Review in 2012 called "Leadership is a Conversation." And it's also very similar to Greenleaf servant leadership. And so the idea is that conversation, not rank, title, or power, define our relationship with employees. As a result, this style stands in sharp contrast with the traditional command and control management model. Mm-hmm. And it's supported by four main attributes, which Groysberg calls the four I's of organizational conversation. Intimacy, which defines how we relate to employees. Interactivity, which describes how leaders use communication channels. Inclusion, which drive how leaders develop organizational content. And intentionality, which characterizes how a leader conveys the strategy. But of course, this conversational leadership doesn't come prepackaged, and it requires on our side an attunement process that creates a culture of belongingness among the employees. And this takes me to the second aspect of how I see my leadership. We have to be somewhat self-centered to dream of starting a new venture or running a great department. But we have to accept that it's not at all about us. As powerful as our aura or influence may be, they will not instill a sense of belongingness around us. We may impress, we may inspire, but raw charisma alone doesn't create the level of comfort and ease that generate belongingness in others. Mm-hmm. So does it make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Yes. Uh-huh.
So to run a people-centric company, we have to be able to move away from what we see as our own center and attune ourselves to the environment and continuously revisit the schemas that guide the way we read and listen to people.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Yes, I do think that when I think back at my leadership journey and being like leading teams over the last 20-something years, people would say, they might ask why I was successful. And I try to put some of the stuff in my book, but the next book I'm writing, I think will have a little bit more depth to that. But there's so much of it is really hard to touch. And it really does have to do with what you're getting to, which is that idea of attuning myself to the people around me. What are their needs? What can I give to them? Yes, I'm there to, kind of help make decisions and guide them as their manager, leader, right? But what is it that they're looking for or needing on their own journey? And how can I be more aware of that? And what happens is I don't think of it in an intellectual way. Right. It is who I am. It is how I was born, and it's how I was born to lead. And so it's when I go to coach someone else to try to do it, it's so natural for me. I have to really break down kind of what you did right here in your book, try to break down some of those components for them to say, this is exactly the types of things you want to do. And here are specific examples about how you want to do it. That's why I love the Leadership with Heart, this podcast, because we get to hear all these stories from all of you, the guests that are part of this community. And then be able to inform the people listening with some very clear examples that maybe they can see themselves in. And then I think that can help them go, oh, that's what it means, and what Marylene's talking about attunement. That's what it means to attune ourselves to the people around us, that kind of thing. It's kind of interesting. So I like the way you've prefaced this.
And actually, it requires some effort. But I would say that mavericks or unorthodox people, nonconformists, finally have fewer problems to attune themselves to others than kind of regular people. Because when we're a maverick, we don't take anything for granted. So we have to make an effort to be understood. So the obstacles we face heighten our will to set up the basis for a more collaborative thinking environment.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
So the more original you are, the higher the chances you have to want to attune yourself to an environment because you want to be understood. And to be understood, you have to understand others.
Yes. Yep. In order to do that, you have to listen well. Right. You have to kind of spend time with them, to that one-on-one time to understand. You have to ask the right questions. A lot of people think that listening is purely a quiet exercise. And what I tell people often is that's only part of it. The biggest part of listening is actually in the questions we ask and how engaged and attentive we are to the answers we receive. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's part of that process from both sides, understanding others, understanding ourselves. So I love this. I love it. So here's a question. Most of us are this maverick idea for you, this idea of just leading, either leading a board, leading an organization, leading people. It comes from some place for most of us. It derives from a certain place, maybe from our childhood, from our parents. It could be from anything. What is it that drives you to lead organizations and people?
What drives me to lead is actually the passion for what will happen next. During my short years in academia, which I love for its intellectual content, I was not comfortable with the idea of only living in a fairly static or slow-paced world of research. So I love the complexity of change, big or small. What pushes me to lead is to communicate change and to invite people to be part of a changing world.
Well, I think that's awesome that you have more of that global view of the why. Most times when I ask people that question, they are, it does stem usually from a parent, something in the childhood, or maybe a leader or manager that they had that really emulated just amazing behaviors like great leadership and caring and transparency and vulnerability and those types of things. So that's what it was that maybe had motivated them. So yours definitely it sounds more like a maverick answer, more unique and more of a global view. And I think there's no right answer in all of this, right? It's right for each person. So I think that's great.
What defined the style of leadership was clearly my education and definitely my uncharacteristic profile. My education and the environment I grew up in was very important in defining my leadership. I was definitely inspired by my parents, who were school teachers in Brittany, the western part of France. And I admired their unbounded faith in their students and how passionate they were in making them stronger because they believe in people. And definitely the reason why I want to attune myself with others is because I believe in people and I believe that they can learn and I can learn from them too, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I did experience this too when I was teaching philosophy. I was shocked to hear my colleagues complain about their students because they were not good enough. And my reaction was, if they're not good enough, it's because you are not good enough. So my personal disposition is to never undervalue people, the ability to learn, and the thought that if I bring something to them, I should be equally open to let them bring something to me, because companies don't innovate. The people in companies do. So
yes.
It's better to work with them, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that idea. I personally believe the same thing. I believe that people can change. When I hear someone goes, well, they're just never going to change, it actually makes my skin crawl, because if I wouldn't be doing the work I do in the organizational and personal development space, like the professional development space, right, inside of companies, if I didn't believe that they could change. Otherwise, I'd be just spinning my wheels and getting nothing accomplished. And when I get excited is when I see the smallest, just the tiniest of improvement in a person's mindset and in their behavior. And it could be a leader, and I see maybe organizational culture start to change just a tiny bit, that's when I get the most excited, because I believe that it can happen. And so I'm willing to put that effort and kind of the energy behind all of that to make it happen. So yeah, we definitely are kindred spirits, because we do believe deeply in people and their ability, right, to do great things once they put their mind towards it, for sure.
Yeah. And as they change, we help them change, they also change us. Okay. So that's also what is exciting. And I come back to my notion of attunement. Okay. Because when you are somebody, having to put yourself in the shoes of true strangers helps you build a different image of yourself. All of a sudden, you rediscover yourself through the eyes of others.
Yes, that is so true. Well, you know what it is? I almost feel like I have a friend of mine, Kimberly Davis, that has a book called Brave Leadership. And she often talks about I don't know if it's called superpowers exactly, but it's something like that. I think it's, it's your super objective is what it is. And so I think that for me personally, when I'm working with organizations, I say organizations, when I'm working with organizational leaders and their people, the people that are within those organizations, I see myself through them to the extent that if I see change take place, I'm able to see the seed of greatness inside of myself. I'm able to see my own giftedness by the change that takes place within them. Because if they're working with me and I'm able to put those gifts forward, I'm able to rediscover my super objective, as Kimberly describes it, every single time I interact and I help them to see that greatness in them. So it's super exciting. I love that focus or that lens that you just provided for the people that are listening right now. So I have a question for you. This is often the tough one. So, as leaders, there are times in our leadership journey when we were leading people, either currently or before, where we were not the best versions of ourselves. We did not take maybe the most appropriate action based upon our own values. Was there a time, a specific example, if you can provide that for the listeners, when you just were not that glowing self that you are now, right? That you evolved leader that you have become? What did that look like? What was the example of that? And then what did you do to come out of that place?
I think that as a CEO, this has happened to me occasionally. And this happened in very specific circumstances. When you run a company, you tend to be kind of hands-on for several years, or if you grow a department. But then we tend to focus more on the material aspect of the business, the numbers, the processes, the tangible accomplishment. And people around us tend to come across as obnoxious distraction who have always some unwelcome issue. And I was blessed early in my career that my first CFO in France actually alerted me to the fact that employees were complaining that they couldn't talk to me anymore. Of course, I didn't like it. I was totally humiliated. But quickly enough, I realized that she had given me the best management lesson I had received so far. And at times, people felt that I was removing myself from the company because, I was like in the finance, I was like in the definition of a new product. And for some reason, I always found people around me to remind me of who I wanted to be. So it was never pleasant, but it always worked very well. Basically, as a CEO, we tend to settle in sort of an ivory tower, especially when we are very busy. Mm-hmm. But we have to keep in mind good lessons by Jack Welch that good leaders make a religion out of being accessible. Because when we start to become accessible, we have the risk of becoming inaccessible all the time.
So you were basically, when folks when your CFO kind of gave you that lesson, it was more about your accessibility and you realized that you needed to kind of make yourself more available to your people. Is that what was happening?
Exactly. Okay. Because we want to be inclusive. We want to be attuned with others, but sometimes we forget. We revert to a more kind of internal mode because we are focused on our things and we forget that we do things with people and not simply with ourselves.
So then, so in that instance, when he had given you that feedback, what did you do from a tactical perspective to try to become more accessible? Did you do anything in a tactical way?
Yes, absolutely. I walked the floor. I decided to, I mean, I was running a sort of comparative analysis between products and so forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I decided to go to my employees and say, well, by the way, we have this competitor that showed up. How do you experience this? How do you feel about this? And instead of designing our competitive advantage sheet from my point of view, I restarted from my employees' point of view. And it's really management by walking. It's you go out there, period.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have to listen to people, you listen to them.
Yeah, and I think it is critical. I remember at the last place that I worked as an employee, I would talk to the executive team and let them know that there are ways for them to. They always felt like it was just hard to do it with all of their plate being so full. And I said, well, why don't you just rotate through each member of the team and make it where you guys you're going out and you are walking the floor. If it's that hard, if your schedule's that tight, try to make sure that it's scheduled in so you know you're going to do it. And then when you go, don't have an agenda. Make sure that you just being with the people where they're at. They're going to find it to be strange to begin with. But once you make that a habit, they're going to know to expect it. And then they're going to open up and be more relaxed about giving you feedback, letting you know what's happening with their customers. All of those things are going to help you anyway from a strategic standpoint as far as growing and the business direction and everything. So, that walking around idea, it never will get old. Right? Yeah. There's not going to be some better way. You can try artificial intelligence all day on this. In the end, you walking around and having the sensory experience with your people where you shake their hand, you touch their arm or you give them a hug, whatever it is that your style is, it's still going to be highly valued forever.
Yeah, but it's a lot of efforts and energy too. Don't forget that.
Yes,
and so that's
absolutely.
why people protect themselves by kind of, closing the door of the office. Because getting the feedback and listening to people is incredibly energy consuming if you do it seriously.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I was just telling someone the other day, I was in a coaching session with someone and I said, this particular person was saying that she is trying to get better about grabbing her emotions or understanding what something may mean or what emotion she's feeling. And I said, I'm kind of the polar opposite. I have a hard time not feeling the emotions and not showing the emotion, or, basically. So in the end, my goal is to not allow other people's emotions to affect my emotional state. Right. And hers was kind of the opposite. And so to that extent, when I go out to my job, what I do, the majority of what I do is voice the employee work. Right. So I'm already doing focus groups and I'm doing all these things and I'm able to listen so attunedly because I love the people. So I'm listening so closely to be able to grasp some of the very key concepts that the executive team needs to know about in order to drive, more engagement and culture improvement. And so, but then sometimes, you can get really into it. You can hear the employees and, they can be in a session where they're just either doing a lot of complaining and you have to back them up and get the emotion out of it and make them more objective. And so then my job in that role is to, be the facilitator that can be objective, can listen closely, but not allow the emotion to get so tied up into it. And that's how I lead. That's how I have to choose to lead.
Yes. Well, when employees have expressed their emotion in a harsh fashion, it's usually because they have not been listened to for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I noticed that over time when I've been working with focus groups and we start with branded focus groups and like culture teams pretty much. And we start at the beginning and they're that way. And once we come together very often throughout the year, you're right. It is definitely more of a partnering feeling. There's a lot less complaining. And because I've been working with their leadership team to make sure that actions are being taken and that we're communicating back to them that action is taken based upon their voice, then they feel, okay, they're more settled because they know action will be taken because they've seen it. Proof is in the pudding. So I think is an interesting point you bring up for sure. So I have a question for you. For leaders who might be listening, any leader who might be listening on the phone, and this is the work that you do too. If there's somebody struggling on the other end or someone who's just kind of on the journey and they may just be at a crossroads, what might be the one pearl of wisdom you might leave them with in their leadership space right now?
I don't know if I have one piece of wisdom. I would tend to see that people who are the leader who are struggling to connect, usually narcissistic leaders, okay, and who basically struggling leaders are leaders who want to run a company made of cogs and who have become cogs in their own eyes, okay? And if they are disconnected, it's because their workforce is disconnected. Their workforce has gone away emotionally. So struggling leaders are like the actors in a play. I don't know if you know the play Waiting for Godot.
Yeah.
So the narcissistic leader, disconnected, is kind of waiting for Godot, but Godot won't come, okay? Mm-hmm. A narcissistic leader is like an actor with an audience, without an audience, and as a result, with no identity. And so this leader had better read the text of Stanislavski, where the actor must look for inner motives to reconnect with others, or simply forget about being a leader. You don't need to be a leader. Some people want to be individual contributors, do their stuff in their corner. Why not? But if you pretend to be a leader, you have to, especially, in 21st century, you have to be on a network. You have to be with others. Leaders, you're not a leader for yourself. You are a leader for others. And it may not be sufficient to say, well, I'm going to take a class on empathy or emotional intelligence, because it's not going to help you get out of yourself. You need the data, and you need the data that others give to you, and you have to process them. So being an emotional leader is not about you. It's about your ability to process data coming from other people.
Love that. That's a great way to end it. And I definitely appreciate you coming on. And I know that people will take a lot from this conversation. The idea behind this last comment is that it's not about you. Get yourself out of the way and know that you're in the role. You were put in the role. You were allowed or privileged to be in the role you're in for the benefit of others. And once that happens, it really opens up a whole new possibility for your leadership. So Marylene, this has been amazing. So for anybody who wants to get a hold of you, what would be the one way they could do that?
So they can connect with me via my website, Delbourg-Delphis.com, but maybe you can put it on your on the podcast.
Yes.
They can connect with me via LinkedIn, of course, via Twitter. It's MD DELPHIS, MD Delphis. I'm very easy to get in touch, to connect, and I usually respond right away. So.
Well, this bit has been really delightful. I'm so excited that Neil referred you over. I think it was a match that's for sure going to be going on in the future. So I appreciate it. And actually, for anybody listening, because I know this is one of those conversations that's deep. We could go and take this like many different levels and slice and dice this. But for anybody who is listening, if you did find value and if you listen to other podcasts, please do rate this on iTunes or wherever you listen. This is a podcast that's global. And it's like over 25 platforms. So do rate it, review it, share it. And when you do that, more people will have access to great conversations like this, because that's exactly what this is. It's a conversation between people who really do care about growing leaders who then impact employees in a positive way. So thank you for joining the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. You can grab the show notes by visiting customerfanatics.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter.